keeps me engaged during the day, not at work. And I also, this is what I was saying, at some point I'm going to just take all my time because you just can't. The switching process is exhausting. I'm doing that for 4 years now. So tired. And the truth is, you don't get your stuff out, the stuff that you care about. So at some point you do that, so I'll do this full time. That's why I'm not doing it now so quick. So yeah, don't do that. Just go straight on your idea and phase it out. That's the best way to go about it.
So from like an advertising perspective, do you think that?
Good idea.
Yeah. I think
Did you read Andrew Chan's blog? You know, he's
What
like
he
a
was-
Uber.
So I actually had this idea before, not saying I had it before him, but before I read the blog, and then I saw that course.
He
Of course,
did
it has
very
to be
good
there.
mocks and
Yeah.
how it would work.
Yeah.
Very interesting, actually.
Is this part of a new list?
I don't think
Or
Zero.
This is a new lesson. This afternoon, I threw out the lesson.
So my product.
So no lecture material.
Which is nothing. Alright, so it's just,
So we're all gonna, it's gonna be
now it's
hands-on.
here.
The whole way is in my brain.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
taxi cab markers.
All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone.
Hey, well.
So, sorry.
We're here.
We're here. So you're here. You're here and you're ready to go. Okay. So the midterm project is coming up. The project you're working on right now, the task manager, is harder than the midterm. In terms of user interface. Conceptually, they are very different apps. Right? The midterm is to mimic the calculator app. That's right. To mimic the calculator app. So, the difference is that the midterm has a lot more juice to it in terms of the engine that you need to build the app, like the logic behind it. It's very much an app logic driven thing. The task manager is very much a UI driven thing. So it's like screens and how do you navigate screens and stuff like that. So that mismatch between what we've been working on and what the midterm is gave me an idea this afternoon. So the name of the lesson today was supposed to be iOS design patterns. We're not going to. Like it's not useful for you right now. It's not like you're going to approach the midterm and be like, I think this is an MVC project, or I think this requires delegation. It's not useful. So today, we together, in class today, are going to build a unit conversion app. All at the same time. And it will mimic all of the skills that you need for the midterm. It's going to mimic it so closely that you're going to look back at the midterm and go, you just gave us the answer. But it's not going to feel like that when you first tackle the midterm. Okay? All right.
Concentrate your store uploading this to YouTube, right?
Yes, he is. Right.
$5.
That's right. Yeah, you start taking tickets at the door.
Here's his idea. He's going to charge for
We have the exit tickets. Constantine's going to collect the entry tickets. $5 per video.
I'll sell
And then we go for drinks.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll sell drinks and snacks. So it's okay.
So So in order to do that, there are a couple of skills that we need that you haven't really used. We haven't done it. The first one is this notion of a computed property. So the syntax is a little bit verbose, but the concept is pretty simple. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to dive into a playground. I'm going to show you what a computed property is all about. Okay? So just watch me first, and we'll try to get through this somewhat quickly. This is lesson 10. Okay. 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 So up until this point, we've been dealing with properties like this. often show up in apps that we need to be able to control in classes. One, the values that are useful to us don't often map one-to-one with the values that we store. And two, oftentimes when we're working with those values, when we set a property, for example, we need something else to happen at the same time, like update a user interface. Right? So if I set a value, sometimes my app is always showing that value. And so I just want the UI to always update automatically. So in this case, if I had an app that showed the name of a dog, and the user changed it, I would set that name, and then I'd have to call a separate function that said, update the UI label that's showing that name, right? Well, with the skills that I'm going to show you today, or here in a minute, you're going to be able to make that happen automatically, right? It's just one step. So every time you set the name, or set the age, or the year that the dog is born, it'll update. Something else will happen at the same time. Okay, so computed properties. A property like name, what we've been dealing with so far, is really just a variable that sits inside a class. So when you create an instance of the class, you have a new variable that comes along with it that's specific to that instance. A computed property sort of expands that notion and lets us customize what happens with that, customize the behavior of that property. So it no longer becomes a variable exclusively, it becomes something else that has richer behavior. So the way I'm going to demonstrate that is to show you this example that we talked about before, where maybe I want to be able to talk about how old my dog is. But there are two ways to describe that. I can store the age of the dog, or I can store the year the dog was born and compute the age, right? So I'm going to do exactly that using a computed property. So I'm going to make a variable called year born, make it an integer, make it optional. And now I'm going to create a computed property that computes the age of the dog. And the syntax looks like this. Okay, I have an optional, so I have to be responsible and unwrap it using this syntax. Remember this? By the way, whenever you do computed properties in Xcode, it will always mess up your indentation. So you have to kind of fight it. Okay. So this is really complicated. Let me back up a second and just do this. So this is the syntax for a computed property. Let me say that Toshi was born in 2013. So this is better. Okay. So this is a computed property. So have a look at the syntax there just a little bit, just for a second. It says var age, super familiar, colon int, explicit typing. But instead of having an equal sign, I have a code block in braces. So inside that code block, now I have to return an integer, just like this. So it's a hybrid between a variable declaration and a function. Does that make sense? It's like then both of them stick together. Which means that because I have a code block, I can put as much logic in there as I want. I can have if statements, I can have loops, I can define functions and call them. I can do all sorts of logic inside of them, right? Like This is often very useful when I have a class that needs to validate user data. So if we have a bunch of properties and you're trying to check like whether a user has properly inputted their social security number and like all that kind of stuff, you can do all of that stuff here and provide a value that indicates an error if there's an error. Okay. So I know that Toshi was born in 2013, so I'm just calculating 2015 minus 2013 here. And I'm returning the number 2, which shows up here. So you notice the syntax on line 19 is exactly the same as if age had been defined as a regular variable, which behaves more like a variable. The difference here is that I cannot do this. I get an error. I'll resolve this in a second. You should note that this computed property in the form that I've written it is read-only. You can only get a value out of it. We call this a getter. You can get a value out of it. Okay. So now I'm going to do that ridiculous nonsense that I did before to try to unwrap this optional value that I created. So that's going to look something like this. Instead of just returning 2015 minus 2013, I'm going to say if let yearborn equals self.yearborn. So this if let statement is what we use to unwrap optionals. Remember that? This unwraps them in a way that we're ensured that we're going to do the check for the value nil at the same time we're getting the value out if it's not nil. So I know that inside this code block I have a valid value, so I can return that calculation that I want to perform, which is 2015 minus year born. In a real app, I would compute what the current year is, but it's not going to change in the next 3 hours. So, does that make sense? This is optional. And so in order to get the real value out of it and check that it's optional, I use this weird syntax, if let. And then I have this new variable called yearborn. So inside that code block, I have a valid value here. If self.yearborn were nil, then I would get this code block. So I'm just going to return 0 because I don't know any better. Another way to handle that would be to make age optional as well and return nil so that I have a parallel behavior between yearborn and age. That's probably the best thing. So we can do that as well. Is this valid? So now you'll notice Toshi.age is equal to nil. But if I set Toshi's yearborn, the year of his birth, to 2013, 2. So now, yearborn is no longer nil, and therefore when I access age, this property, I'm going to execute this code block. When that code block executes, Swift checks to see if self.yearborn is nil. It's not. So it grabs the value out of the optional and sets it to yearborn, to underscore yearborn. And then returns this value 2015 minus underscore yearborn. Underscore yearborn happens to be equal to 2013. The difference is 2. Yes?
You might have said this, and maybe I blanked out for a second, but is this, so you initially had, so you had the self.yearborn, and then you had an exclamation point to unwrap it, right? But
originally I had that, yeah.
So could you not do the let and just do if yearborn is equal to, and then add the exclamation point at the end? Is that like two syntax?
There are two different syntaxes. You only use an exclamation mark when you are absolutely sure that that value is not nil. You've done something else before, and it's not nil, because you start getting errors. Is the playground still like optional? it stopped executing the rest of the stuff. So, do you ever get this in the playground?
No, I remember on error, but it does stop execution after it.
Yeah, after it receives it. So it's not servicing the error here, but
In-app will just
in
crash.
app, it would totally crash the entire app. So it's not a risk worth taking, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So that's why I used this syntax. So in this case, I can do this if let opt equals optional int return home, and then else return yak. And yak is sorry, no return. It's not a function. Okay. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's another option, because I know last class I had a couple things that were different on my Xcode, and the error I got is type int does not conform to protocol nil when I did the return nil value.
When you did which value?
Return nil, I got an error that says type int does not conform
Do
to
you put a
protocol.
question mark?
No.
Yeah,
What?
you need a question mark right after
Oh,
on line
sorry.
14, on my line 14. So whenever you're dealing with the value nil, you're always going to be
With an option.
yeah,
Okay.
like it's like 99% of the time you've got an optional in there, and so you should just make sure that you got those question marks that indicate optional. Okay, does this make sense? Ish. Okay. So the thing that I mentioned down here, this line 32. That one. I actually want to be able to do that. Like it makes intuitive sense that I want to be able to set the age of my dog just by saying my dog is 2 years old, right? So we actually have the capability of declaring that in our computed properties. So the way we do that is a bit of a strange piece of syntax. So I want you to just keep in mind those lines and what they mean. So all I'm going to do is wrap them in something else. And there's going to be a lot of braces. So inside these outer braces for my computed property, I can wrap this with a block that's offset by the keyword get. This clause is called the getter. Now, so this is responsible for line 37.
What did you do to move everything over the tab?
I'm sorry?
What was the shortcut to move everything over?
Oh, that's a command right bracket. And then to indent the other way, it's command left bracket. No?
Didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
I always hit tab and erase it.
How did you survive?
No,
I'm just kidding.
I always just control I and fix everything.
Oh, really?
But that's only after I hit tab and I erase everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Some IDEs use tab. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so that's the getter, which gives us line 37. I can also say set. Notice I do not need to specify type here because it's assuming that it's going to be an optional int. I don't have to set it explicitly in this case. So now, this is actually what's going to handle what happens when line 40 is executed. Right now, nothing happens, but what I can do is say, I can actually set year born now. I get an error because it says it's optional. So now I'm going to do my unwrapping. I don't want to get you in bad habits, but I'm going to put an exclamation mark there. Because usage-wise, I'm going to try to make sure that I never say dog.age equals nil. Like that will likely never happen. So I'm
have to be the same type as the age?
As age? I believe not. But I think you can.
That's disappointing.
No. Is it complaining? Yeah, so I don't think that's older.
Interesting.
I think it has to be the same. I think it has to be the same type. Okay. So in this case, if I set Toshi's age to 3, look what happens. Year born is equal to 2012. And Toshi.age is equal to 3. And that happens because my calculations seem to be correct. 2015 minus year age is 2015 minus year born. So those are inverses of each other, which how old my dog is versus when my dog was born. They go back and forth. Calculations are pretty simple. Let's see if I can explain this a little bit. Okay. So computed properties, getters and setters. Yep. Okay. Computed properties, getters and setters. In summary, you can define a property that behaves just like a variable. So you do dot the variable name to get the value out. Dot the variable name equals to push a value into it. Computed properties can be read-only. If you, instead of declaring the property like a variable, you use a code block after it and just say return a value. You can put all sorts of code in there to compute whatever that value is. And then finally, you can go really deep and be very specific and say, I have a getter that's going to do some computation when I do the dot property syntax. Or I can do a setter that also does some computation when I do the dot property equals another value syntax. So it's like you're popping the hood a little bit on how properties work. And you can kind of control what goes on when those access patterns happen. Okay.
So you don't need them together. They're both used for two different reasons independently of each other.
You need them together.
So whenever you have a setter, you need a getter.
Whenever you use a setter, I think no wait, that's not true. You can use either or.
Yeah, you can use a setter without a getter. It's very, very rare.
It's very rare. Yeah.
But yeah.
So
You can use a setter without a getter.
so like
Yeah. Go ahead.
well, so the setter seems, because the getters or the view computational properties view only, the setter seems to be the way to kind of manipulate it outside of it.
That's right.
So
And so what happens is this whole chunk of code becomes a set of logic that starts to manipulate the data that's flowing in and out of that property. But the state, the actual piece of data that the class is holding onto, is actually this year born. Right? So generally what you do with computed properties is you're trying to create like a convenience for yourself. It's like as you start to use this class and as you start to deploy it in your own code, now all you have to do is just say dot blah equals, and it does all of this other logic for you automatically, right? So for example, in the setter, if I had a UI element, some label that was showing how old my dog was, I'd be able just to say self update age label like that. That's an invalid function, so I'm just going to write out stuff here. So this actually starts to show some of the power of the property. So if I have one of these properties in a view controller, for example, I can access my UI and tell it to update automatically as I'm setting that value over and over again.
making what we just did in the last class easier.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what we're about to do much easier as well. That's right. That's why we're doing this today instead of other more abstract stuff. Okay, so I'm not going to ask you really to do this, to author one of these on your own right now. I'll post this later as an example. But what I think we should do is dive straight into building this app. Because I think that's going to be the most fun, the most informative, and will warm you up for what the midterm is going to be like. So, Angel, I have a question. Is the best way to build this app individually, one step at a time, or should we pair them up? Have one person take notes, and the other person perform the actions, and then swap periodically.
Unfortunately, that didn't work too well.
It didn't work last time.
So I'd say individual, and we'll just go around more often.
Okay. All right. So the way that I like to build this app is to not be as clumsy. Is to do the UI first. We'll dive in, we'll build the user interface together. It should be a lot of really quick drag and drop, copy paste kind of stuff. And then we'll hook up everything that we need into the view controller. And then we will write a couple of classes that represent the operations of converting units from imperial to metric. Remember all those calculations we did before? Here's why. And you know that unit conversion apps in the App Store are huge. They're like everything from 99 cents to $3.99. They're making tons of money off of unit conversion apps. So if you finish this project in class, just go ahead and submit it. No.
Partially serious.
But it's partially serious, yes. Okay. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's create a new project together. So a single view application, call it unit converter. And save it somewhere where you can get to it. Okay. So I'm assuming that you guys are fairly facile now with Interface Builder, how to work your way around and try to keep up. If I go too fast, stop me, and we'll slow down and kind of recalibrate where everyone is. Okay?
And if you're too shy, just slack me.
Yeah. Okay. This is going to be a wild ride. Okay. Let's go into main storyboard. Disable use auto layout again. So this is going to be a single view app, and the concept that we're going to go for is going to look something like this. So it's always good to start drawing out your apps first. Alright, so the easy way to do an app like this would just be to use a UI text field so that we get the regular app keyboard. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that because the calculator app on the iPhone doesn't have the regular keyboard. It has its own keyboard, which consists of a bunch of UI buttons. So we're going to try to mimic that. So down below, we're going to create a series of 12 buttons. Like this. Is it arranged for numbers like this? Is this how they are? I don't even remember.
No, because of the computations.
Yeah, well they're going to be. But this is the layout of the numbers.
It's close enough. Oh, the numbers, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to have a bunch of numbers down here. We're we're going to show a value up here. We're going to show units, an equal sign, and then the output value and the output units. And then here we're going to have a series of operations. Fahrenheit to Celsius, like pounds to kilograms, miles to kilometers, inches to centimeters, like this. So just single buttons. The idea is that I'll punch the numbers in here, and that'll set this value. So I'll type 212, and that'll put 212 here. And then I'll hit Fahrenheit to Celsius. I'll tap that, and then this guy will come up with the answer. That user flow makes sense? Like what we're aiming for? Okay. So what we're going to need are 12 buttons here, 4 buttons here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 UI labels here. Okay? But we're going to use the power of copy-paste to make this easier for us. So let me do a couple of these buttons, and you just watch me do it, and I'll tell you what I'm typing, and then you can blaze away. Okay? Okay. So now we're going to find UI buttons. I'm going to drag one of them. And I'm going to do number 7 first. So these buttons are really hard to see because they have no background and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is go to the parameters over here on the right, into the attributes inspector. And I'm going to scroll all the way down until I find this little subpanel where it has the background color and the tint color. And I'm going to change it to something that, you know, looks relatively okay to me. So I have this red, default red color that I'm going to use, and I'm going to change the tint to white. So now I actually have a little square-like button. I'm going to stretch it out until it's about yay big. I'm going to change the font as well so that it's a little bit bigger and easier to read. So up higher up, it's going to say font system 15. I'm going to change the size up to maybe 20 or something like that. Now I'm going to go to our little Springs Instructs pane, and hopefully we'll learn how to use this somewhat intuitively. So we're going to go over auto layout after the midterm. But I'm going to turn these two off and turn on the springs on the inside here. So I get this. So this is my end result. Number 7, rectangular-like button, and then all I have are these two inner width and height markers turned on. Okay? All right. So if you're here, you're halfway there. So all I'm going to do is copy paste. Just Control-C, Control-V after selecting that button, and I'm going to move it over until it snaps in place. Then I'm going to paste again. Just move it over. So now I have 3 buttons side by side. Now I'm going to select all 3 buttons like this. Just drag select. And I think you have to start your dragging inside the screen. Now I'm going to copy and paste all 3 of those. Just paste 3 times. Just move my way down like this. 12 buttons that all say the number 7. Did you see that? Sorry, you lost.
No, I just, my
Don't try
white
to do it.
space isn't
Don't worry about it.
exact.
Don't
Okay.
worry about it.
Don't try to follow along. Don't try to code and watch at the same time because he's gonna go a little bit.
Yeah, don't try to get things like positioned perfectly. There's a bunch of layout tools that you can use later to distribute 1 to 7, 8, 9, just go through and double click and change all the numbers to what they should be. 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and then dot, 0, and the capital letter C for clear. That's it. You good? Rock and roll.
But this is just a label. This is just a label, right? Where you actually have to say that the button corresponds to a number in code itself, or can it identify what text it actually?
Yeah, we're going to cheat and use the label that we type as the value to insert. That's a fantastic question because it's extremely valid. Like if I tap 7, should that be hard coded as the number 7, like an integer in my code, or can I just kind of look at the button object and it says its text label is 7, and I'll just grab that string and convert it to an integer and go on my merry way, right? It's good in an app like this because that will likely never ever change. Like I probably won't change the number 7 to anything else. But in a different app, like if your UI designer comes along and says, oh, we're not going to call it 7 anymore, we're going to actually write out the number SEVEN, now you're fucked. Now you have to go back and start recoding stuff. But we're gonna cheat today because it's much, much faster. And what that means is that 11 of these 12 buttons are all going to point to the same IB action. Okay. But you got all that in place now, right? Excellent. So we can do the same thing for these conversions if you want. Just grab one and copy and paste it and move it way up. And just change it F to C. We only really have to do that one for now. And maybe we'll go back later and copy them in, or you can just go ahead and, if you think you're fast enough, go ahead and copy it all in miles to kilometers. Sorry, miles to kilometers. And then what's the other one? Pounds to kilograms.
Oh, we're missing our inverse.
Yeah, we're gonna leave that to the crowd to figure out. I'm gonna change the font of all these too, so I can fit a little bit more text in there. Just centimeters. I'm gonna leave myself a little bit more room. You know, maybe if you have a little bit of extra time, you can kind of style it up. You know, choose a different background color or something because they are different operations. You know, just kind of do your interface builder thing to tune it up a little bit, if you want. Happy little buttons. Happy little buttons. Long live buttons. Okay. Now I'm going to drop in those 5 UI labels. I'm going to do the same kind of thing where instead of dropping in one at a time, I'm just going to drop in one at the top. But the first thing that I want to do after I drop the label in is stretch it out so that it covers a good portion of the screen, maybe 2/3 of the width of the screen like this. I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that down. So now I have the input and the output. Maybe I'll copy both of those guys like this. Copy them sideways. So now I have the units.
You're 4 now?
I have 4 of them, yeah. We don't necessarily have to have 4 of them. We could probably get away with 2 because we could combine the units and the values themselves, but I have 4 here. I think it'll be okay.
But you stretched out the first one?
I stretched out the first one to make it a little bit wider. What I also think I'm going to do to these 2 guys is I'm going to change the alignment of the text to justify them like this, just so that the units and the values show up next to each other. These guys are a little long, so I'm going to go into the size pane here, the size inspector, and make the ones on the right shorter, maybe 80 units wide, like this. Yo,
Shouldn't the input be a text field? So like,
the input's a text field. It'll give us, by default, the iOS keyboard. We don't want that. Because the calculator doesn't have that.
sneaky, sneaky.
That's right, sneaky. There's so much code that you're about to write that's used in the midterm, it's actually not fair.
Say that again?
There's so much code that you're going to write today that's used in the midterm that's almost not fair.
Well, I'll show them all the code I had to write without using the interface builder.
Oh, really? Oh, and then
That'll
that'll make it feel
1%.
better.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Angel's hardcore, by the way. I'm not. I'm just like as fast as I can freaking get it out. If you want to put another label in there that's just an equal sign for being pretty, go ahead. You can go ahead and do that too.
Where did you see the right justify? I'm just looking for it.
Oh, okay. It's under the attributes inspector. It's up at the very top.
Oh.
It says alignment.
Oh,
Then I just clicked on the.
okay.
So you can at this point hit play, and it should show you the UI as it exists. Seriously, it's not letting me drag my simulator over. Screw that.
What just happened?
I couldn't drag the simulator over because I was in full screen mode apparently. Okay, so all of these guys, all these labels, should have the same sizing properties that we had before for the buttons. So we need to go to the size inspector and just turn on the guys in the middle, like this. I think that'll fix this problem. I'll come back to that in a second once I'm sure that that's the case. Okay, so you should be able to get the landscape view at the same time. When you're in the simulator, you can hit Command left and right, and that'll rotate your iPhone.
Wait, what did you do?
Command what?
Sorry,
Command what?
Command left and right.
Oh, command.
Left and right.
I see, okay.
So again, these labels right here, if you select them, in the size inspector, your little springs and struts guy should look like this. It should have the width and height turned on and all of the margins turned off. So now you have a nice responsive design. It's not super nice in terms of the sizing and being like taking advantage of the screen property, but at least you get a landscape layout that is functional. With auto layout, we're going to learn how to customize those different locations, those different views. All right. Well, all our buttons placed and labels placed, and stuff. Anybody too far behind to catch up? All right. All right. Good.
Yeah, mine.
No?
I just pressed build and it's like taking forever to load.
Oh, okay.
But I'm done.
Okay. Sure, you can test it. Then it should be. All right. So the framework of the app is in place. Now what we're going to do is start looking this up, empowering it with code. Question? No. Questions? Okay. So one thing that we're going to go over right now, in addition to building this app and building out the functionality and explaining the class structure and stuff that we're going to build, I'm also going to show you a little bit about app building technique, which is like taking one piece of functionality at a time, building it, like testing it, using print lines so you can look at code and look at output in the console, like trying to build an app conceptually, one little piece at a time, so you don't end up writing a ton of code buttons at the same time, and then having to like confuse yourselves. Developers get themselves into that position all the time. It's not because you're beginners at all. It's just because like oftentimes developers, especially ones that teach themselves, don't know that there's a discipline to creating an app. So we're going to try to do this in a very stepwise way. So one thing that we absolutely have to do is when you tap on one of these number buttons down here to actually get the proper number out of it. And we're going to try to figure out a way to do that without having to write 12 different actions for this. So I'm going to go into my assistant editor. I'm going to get rid of all the panes around it. So I'm going to clear out the navigator, I'm going to clear out the inspector, I'm going to clear out the debug pane. So all I see are these two guys. All right. I'm going to temporarily forget that these are here. Create a lot of white space, just for visual purposes. And I'm going to write an IB action manually. And I'm going to call it on button pressed. That's optional. Zip option. It's optional. So make sure that UI button is an optional UI button.
How did you decide that was optional?
It's it's not convention, it's required that it be optional based on how IB actions are defined. So if I were to do this like the old-fashioned way, I think that if I select UI button here, this is just for demonstration purposes. No, it's not.
It's optional. I think it's optional when you select any object.
Oh, really?
But if you specifically select UI button, then it's not.
Oh, all right. Never mind. Forget that. Sweet. All right. So you should have something that looks like this now. So, why did I say that? Okay, so IB actions, when they're called, will send a reference to whatever object initiated the action. So the convention is to call that sender. So this is very... You won't believe what's happening. All right, a little aside here. Why does this make this so hard? Okay. Will not. Okay. Will not believe this. My life to me is
Whoa,
This is a completely different
awesomeness.
project.
Pretty sweet.
What's that? This is a completely different project in Xcode. And I'm mousing over that guy, and I get this. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Wait a second, what?
This is my project that we're doing right now. This is the project that I did before class to test this idea.
It's
No,
a sample.
no.
And there, oh man, little dot, it's like following me around,
Mhm.
it's connected to nothing.
How do you get rid of it?
I think it just got rid of itself. Okay, apologize for that. Debacle. Okay, so the point is that we need to write some logic for what happens when you tap on one of these buttons. So the logic that I want to try to do, if I were to write this out in pseudocode, this is another one of these techniques that you'll probably find really helpful, is to, in plain English, write out the steps that you need to do. So this is going to be get the text label from the UI button. Convert it to, and then what we're going to do is like add it to the input value. Update the input values UI label.
That's only from 4.0 to 9.
09. And the dot.
And
Exactly right. So right. Okay. So
it's 0 to 9. No.
if I tap 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or dot, I'm going to do this. Right. If C, clear the input value. So it should look something like this. I think this is right. I think it's the same thing. So I had it right before. Because we have to update the label no matter what we do.
true.
Right? So I think this is the right pseudocode for us. I write my pseudocode in Python. It's a little program joke right there.
How can we see that?
I'm sorry.
How can we see that?
The colon and the indentation. Nerd. Okay. So we're going to go one step at a time, perform each one of these actions, and then use print lines so that we can see the results in the console to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Okay? So here, I'm going to create a constant called button text. And I'm going to grab the sender. The sender actually has a property called title label. I was like, text label, label text.
Those make too much sense.
I'm sorry, yeah, that would make sense. So remember, sender is a type UI button. So when we dot, we're going to get a bunch of methods that UI button gives us and properties. The property that we want is title label. What's the type? Sean, what's the type of the title label?
String.
Nope.
Optional.
Sorry.
It's an optional.
It's an optional what?
Integer.
Nope.
Double.
It's right on the board.
It's an optional.
Read it. Allison, optional UI label, an optional UI label. So, I know. So it's optional. It's a value that comes along with Xcode, like with the UI kit, excuse me. So I'm just going to assume that it's not nil. So I'm going to exclamation mark that bad boy and dot my way to the next property that I need, which is text. We've already dealt with this before, right?
What's that exclamation point do?
The exclamation point unwraps an optional. That means if it's not nil, it'll give us the real value that's sitting there. Optionals can be nil or a real value. assume it's a real value and use exclamation mark to get an instance of a UI label out of it. A reference to an instance of the button. So here I'm going to say text. Text is also optional, and all of my buttons that I've used over there have a value in there, so I'm fairly sure it's never going to be nil. So I'm going to exclamation mark that as well. And I'm going to say print line button text. Here, once I've done all of this work, I can stop. I can say, okay, I have a real value. I feel like I have a value here. I think it's correct. I'm going to check myself because I know that every other thing that I have to do depends on the value of that constant. So I'm going to make sure that I have my code working properly at this point. This is a good time to stop. Write a print line statement to give you the value. And then, the last thing that we have to do is hook up all of these buttons. So I'm going to hook them up one at a time. Where it says touch up inside. I'm going to take that plus sign and watch what happens. I'm going to drag it over and look, the entire body of that function is highlighted.
And that's because of the UI button.
Sorry?
Is that because of the UI button?
No, I think any action, any action will do that. So one at a time, UI button, drag it over here. Touch up inside over here. See how that works? So, control click. The event that we're interested in is touch up inside. I'm going to drag it over here. One button at a time.
Can I interject an interesting segue?
Sure.
So Aaron found out that there's a outlet inspector,
Oh, really?
and it's that arrow next to the ruler.
Yeah, you have to be in the storyboard, and it'll show up in your
And
the right pane.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Also, Objective-C has a ID action collection where you can tie all of them. Like there's a faster way to do it. I don't think Swift has it though.
Oh, really?
To have everything just in one step, have everything go to a single action.
Oh, that's cool. This is about as complicated as we'll get, I think. 12 buttons. Oh, yeah.
It links
that's
it
nice.
to
Yeah.
the action and then shows all of the things.
Oh, I see. That's cool. All right. So now's a good time to hit play. Let's see what happens. So what's going to happen when I hit, the thing that's going to happen when I click a button is Xcode, because the simulator and Xcode are talking to each other the whole time, is my console should pop up. Oh my god. This is the point where you feel like, all right, the app is practically done. It's downhill from here. 4, 1, 2, 3, C, 0 dot. C, 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 2, 3 dot. Okay. Anybody have that working?
Partially.
Working? Working? Partially?
Yeah, it stopped working.
Oh.
I'll see. I'm just going to rerun it.
I,
Yeah, it stops after. Oh, there we go.
Right? Yeah. Print those lines. Print those lines. You know? Megan.
I have an error on my print line.
Oh,
And
you're
why?
Oh,
Yeah, I just looked up before.
thanks.
It says it's unresolved identifier, but it's the same.
Do you have an extra T?
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's going to be your errors half the time, I swear.
When you
Those
hit-
were the same for real programmers too. Excuse
When
me.
you hit C, type C, is that supposed to happen?
I'm sorry. C, yeah.
It is supposed to type C?
It's supposed to type C.
Yeah, okay.
C, C, C. So there are two ways we can handle this. We can either have another action just for C, or we can check to see the value.
Okay.
And so with the pseudocode we've written, we're checking.
Everybody got it to run?
It's so beautiful.
So what do they put in inside is gonna show down there, right?
Inside, yeah, whatever you put inside here
Yeah.
is going to show. And so,
I
again,
just tried.
yeah, again, really tricky, because if you change this to the word clear
CD.
instead of a C, it'll say clear over here, and that could potentially mess up your logic. But we're cheating, so let's not change any of this stuff for now, okay? All right, I want to make sure everybody has that. Is you running? Is it? Nice. Okay. All right. So let's take a step back and start to think about the rest of the app for a second. We've achieved a milestone. Let's think about where we're going now. So I have all these buttons hooked up, but like, what does it really mean to add it to add that value, add the letter, or the digit that I've typed to the input value? Well, what is it that I need in my app over here in order to like store the state of the app? Like, what do I actually need? So the behavior that I want is that if I were to type 212, this would happen. So I type 2, and then the value that I show is 2. I press 1, and the value that I show is 21. Right? This is how the calculator behaves on the iPhone, right? If I type 2, the value that I want to see is 212. What does that operation look like?
Appending.
I'm sorry?
Looks like an appendant. You're
An
appending it.
Appending it to
An array,
an array or
dictionary.
dictionary. Well,
Well,
can you append to a dictionary?
no.
Not really. There are two things that we can append to. We have array and we have a string. That's right. So our candidates for the data structure that we have are a string or an array. Okay? Which one do you like
String.
and why? Why do you like string?
It's going to be easy to convert to the different types, and you have less code to iterate between the final value. For instance, for the operations, if you use a string to get 212 will be shorter if you use a string, whereas an array you have to iterate through an array.
Yeah, you have to do some kind of extra massaging. We have to say, okay, I have an array of strings, and then I have to join them together to get a single string, and then I have to convert that string to an integer or a double, right? So we'll go with string.
Can I just say one word?
Go for it.
The problem is that there's the potential of all that code that you save is all code you have to write to be able to clear. Wait, are we going to clear the last character, or are we going to clear everything?
The whole thing.
Oh, never mind.
We're just gonna
Okay.
we're gonna
Never
steamroll
mind
that.
that.
We're gonna steamroll that guy.
Couldn't
But
we?
even if you had that, couldn't you just use the get character position and then just there?
In Swift strings, there's no way to get to a character by index, believe it or not, because they're Unicode, and the width is variable. So a lot of you don't understand what that means, and we'll get to it. We'll get to it eventually. We won't for this example, but you will for the midterm, and Angel will be the guy to explain.
Yeah, because I was following his thought process originally, and that didn't work.
Couldn't we just type the array to int, and then we don't have to actually convert anything from a string?
That will cause a lot of problems.
Oh, really?
In theory, it should be that easy, but you'll see as we come to that issue.
Okay.
Especially when you type a dot.
Yes.
Like now your order of magnitude is all off, and now you're setting the other side of the decimal, right? So for something like a banking application, where you had a very specific data type that was keeping track of round-off error and stuff like that, then you might want to do that. But I mean, like an industrial strength banking application, not like an app. But okay. So we have a lot of values floating around here. So I'm just going to start to name them, right? Because we have to be able to take this value and then go from a string to, I'm going to say a double, because we have the ability to put a dot here. And all that we're going to have to do now is name these guys, so that we have a terminology that we can start to use. So I'm going to call this guy my input value. I'm going to call this guy my input units. This guy my output value. And this guy my output units. Okay? Sound fair? Alright. So after I type all this stuff, the next thing that I want to type, or tap rather, as a user, is F to C. Which I'm converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius. And then what happens? I should do some magic calculations. That's magic. And then compute the number 100 somehow. Somehow I'm going to get to the number 100. And then put that here. Display it on the screen as my output value. Right? Okay. So that's my flow. I have some names for the values that I need to keep track of. And I have my user interface flow here that I want to start mimicking. I know the data type I'm going to use. I know the operation that I'm going to perform, string append. I think I have a good outline of what's going on in my app. I have a little bit of sense of the code that I'm going to write, because I'm starting to think in terms of types and variables that I'm going to create. And definitely in terms of UI actions that I'm going to perform. Tap these guys, tap this, see this happen, see this update. Okay? And the last and most critical piece, I have some magic that I have to code somewhere. This conversion. Okay. So let's make it happen. So my input values, all this stuff, they just say label right now. So I think that's okay for the time being. But it would be nice to put something in there that kind of makes more sense. But I don't really have a way to get to them yet in my user interface. But I think that the first thing that we want to do is what we talked about just a little bit before, this string append. So I'm going to go ahead and create a property for myself that's a string. And I'm going to call it input value. Let's set it to default of empty. So now, I have this value button text. So I want to append whatever this guy is to this value. So let's test this first. I'm not going to worry about this if statement yet. All I want to do is get my appending. So now I'm going to say self.input value plus equals button text. I'm going to erase that original print line. Well, maybe I'll put it back in and comment it out. Like this. And just do the append operation. Now I'm going to test to see that I'm getting the behavior that I want to get. Okay? So hit play. And then I'm going to watch my console. And as I type, I'm just going to type 212. That's the example. That's going to be my test case example. Because I know what the behavior is going to be. And that's super critical, by the way, is the actions that you use to test your app. You should have a known behavior in your mind. And the known behavior, there are two known behaviors that we have. First known behavior, I want to append a digit to the number. Second behavior, 200 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to 100 degrees Celsius. Right. 2, 1, 2. Oh. Is that working?
My maybe because I didn't have,
Do you have a touch up